else. They've been in Philippi, and they're running a little bit late. They're on their way, so they should be joining us in 5, 10, 15 minutes, hopefully. So he's asked me if I would just chair the meeting for the beginning part of it. And I had already agreed to say a few introductory comments, so that is fine. So I think we should start, and then they will just hopefully be joining us a little bit later. And so welcome everybody to what I hope is going to be a really interesting and quite grounding seminar that adds to and perhaps shifts our views a little bit in relation to place and space around some of the themes that have been central to this series of Index and Transformation seminars. So, and this is, we're going to be looking at issues around renewable energy within South Africa and some of the debates around a just transition. And as you know, the people who are going to be leading us in that discussion are two students in my research chair, Tumi Malope and Steph Borchardt. So just to introduce them first, and then I'm going to say a few words very briefly, and I have promised them that I will be brief because the main point of the seminar is to hear what they have to say and to use that as a way of thinking also about some of the larger issues around a just transition. But just first of all to introduce them very briefly. So Tumi Malope, who's a very active participant in the seminar series, he's completing his PhD on the contribution of renewable energy to decent work and local sustainable development, a case study of wind farms in Louisfontein, which is a small town in the Northern Cape, which he will be talking to. And Tumi joined our department from the University of Pretoria, where he did his master's in industrial sociology and labour studies. And we're very pleased that you chose to make the move to Stellenbosch. And then Steph Borchardt, also an active participant in the seminar program, the departmental one. She's completing her master's on local energy needs and challenges in Daar, a renewable energy hub in the Karoo, so at some distance, in fact, from Louisfontein. And Steph did her honours in this department, and her research project was offering a critical analysis of the official public participation process around fracking, so another form of non-renewable energy, also in the Karoo. And we're very pleased you chose to stay with us, Steph, to do your master's. So both are doing, I think, really very significant work in what is a very important area. And they're raising a whole set of issues, which when they started their work was certainly already very important globally and nationally, but were not receiving the amount of attention that they are right now, sort of politically, with a really sustained political debate now on what a just transition means. But these issues are themes that we have been addressing in this seminar series around climate crisis, but also around climate justice and what that means. And then within that, trying to think about issues around social and environmental justice in this very urgently needed transition away from fossil fuels to cleaner and more sustainable forms of energy. But how do we do this in a society as unequal, as divided as ours, and also with an enormous backlog in terms of social services and the current unemployment crisis as well? And so they're dealing with those themes, which are really very important, but what's also very valuable about their work is that they are shifting their attention away from the metropoles in Cape Town, but also Johannesburg and Pretoria, and the coal-producing regions of the country, which are obviously very important sites as well, but they're shifting attention from there to the sites where renewable energy, or major sites where renewable energy is actually being produced, and trying to look at what does a just transition mean from there. And trying to think about these places not just as spaces of energy production, which is how many people I think are looking at them, and therefore the energy production for the greater national but also global good in terms of South Africa's contribution to global carbon emissions, but also looking at them as places with very pressing social concerns of their own, and the tensions then between the investments in renewable energy and local needs. So one of the themes which we are exploring in the broader program is around the politics of scale, and their work is certainly looking at that. So I did tell Stephen that I would say something very briefly about my chair, not to spend time on this, but also just to help locate some of the work that Tumi and Steph are doing, because we are looking very centrally at issues around sustainability, but also trying to, and within that, trying to understand the social and the ecological and complex social ecological systems, and what are the drivers and trajectories of change, but how do we think about the social and the ecological. Looking at meanings of development as well, and then with the Karoo as a primary research site, and in part because there are really significant land use changes taking place in the Karoo, and it's being repositioned in a number of ways as a space for not necessarily development, but developments that are being designed primarily with external constituencies rather than the people who are living there in mind. And renewable energy is a case study in that. And so just as very briefly on the Karoo, it's a semi-arid zone, as probably most of you will know. It makes up nearly a third of South Africa and well over a third of all commercial farmland in South Africa. So spatially, it's really quite significant, very significant. But it's home to under 2% of the population, so you have a disjuncture there between its spatial extent, its area, and its significance in commercial farming, which is also important with regard to land reform. But there's a disjuncture between the spatial extent and its population, and the political and economic marginalization of the people living there. And feeding into perceptions of this place as an empty space to be exploited for the greater good of external constituencies, as I've said, rather than the social place. So it's place, space, and scale as important themes. As we will be hearing more today, it is a significant site for producing renewable energy, but it's also been a site, and it's been contested around the production of non-renewable energy. So issues around fracking and uranium mining are very much there as well, and they're sort of coexisting in interesting ways with the drive for renewable energy. And it's also been earmarked as a place for the production of global astronomy as well, which has been another important theme in the work that we're doing, with the development of the square kilometre array, and many of you may have heard about that, and also the observatory outside Sutherland. And here, what you may not know is that almost the entire Northern Cape has been declared an astronomy advantage area in terms of legislation that was passed in 2007, which gives the Minister of Science and Technology really quite extensive powers to regulate land use within this region. And again, it's regulating with astronomy in this case in mind. So the coexistence of all these different land uses is another theme that we're looking at. This is just showing some of the sites that we're working on, and this is just, whoops, wrong way. My last slide before I'll hand over to Tumi and Steph. But just showing, thinking about the Karoo, this extensive area, marginalized economically and politically, sparsely populated but not empty, which is where many people actually are thinking about it from outside. And these competing land uses. So major debates around the future of this region, but also then debates around energy and where it comes from, and who decides, questions around whose Karoo is it, and who decides, where's the locus of power in that. So you have livestock farming, you have astronomy, and what you have here is just showing how these are cutting across each other, these showing the areas that are potentially being set aside for prospecting around shale gas, this showing the zones for astronomy in the center, and then along with that there are major debates around land and agrarian change, but also around environmental change, with climate change being seen as impacting very significantly on this region. So we're thinking about it, amongst other things, as a new resource frontier. And what Tumi and Steph are going to be talking about today will be around renewable energy as a resource and how it's working out in relation to local dynamics, but also national and global. National dynamics, I think, more particularly is the focus. But obviously the global issues around climate change and South Africa's contribution to carbon emissions is very much there as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tumi.
So I wasn't really sure what to do today, but I found a friend of mine gave me some advice, and I will try to be as blunt as possible. So I don't know what a just transition looks like, but it has its principles, and I've made its tenets rather. They are there. There should be some strong consensus. Well, I can't see my notes now, Steph. There should be some strong consensus. There should be policy coherence. There should be, there's no one size fits all. So what happened in Germany or the Netherlands will not necessarily happen in South Africa. And there should be specific policies that looks at gender, and there should be a creation of more decent work. And what unions have been crying or flagging out is that there's no strong social consensus, and there's no idea what this decent work will look like as we transition to a low carbon economy. Oh, I see now. So our system, the transition started in 2009, and at first it was thought of as a feed-in tariff, which means renewable energy companies come build up their systems and produce energy and feed them into the grid. However, it was stopped, and it was now changed to a bidding system. What this means is that each bidder, there's a cap on an auction. Let's say bid one is one auction. So there's a cap, let's say 70 cents per kilowatt. But what a bidding system does is that it brings an economic development component, which would basically be understood as a social level plan for the company that will be enacted within a community that they are based in. At the moment, there has been 7 bids, 7 rounds. So a bid is an auction. So it's one round, bid, auction. I'm using them interchangeably. So there's been 7 of them, 6,422 megawatts. In comparison, just under 4,000 is connected to the grid. And with that, we are told that just over 200 billion, of which 20% is foreign direct investment. It is important to understand that the main contributor of the cost of renewable energy is not actually the technology itself, but the cost of borrowing money. So investors go to the bond market, borrow money, and invest in a project. But we are now getting to an interesting phase where the interest rates globally is going down. In some points, there's negative interest rates in some countries, and this has implications on the uptake of renewable energy. As mentioned, the jobs which unions are fighting over, their concern is that the jobs are temporary, and they are correct. Most of the jobs are temporary, a lot of them actually. Just to show you how this was how our energy grid looked like without the intake of renewable energy. And now that's how it looks like, with all different types of renewable energy sources. We have solar, predominantly solar and wind, but I think 60% of it is wind. So this is just how a grid looks like. And what this means is that for Eskom, is that within this entire value chain, they're not playing any significant role apart from opening up the grid for renewable energies to penetrate the grid. So they are buying it and selling it to us at a significant cost. So we're actually subsidizing the transition consumers. And but they're not the key players. They're not playing much. But the problem is that they are a monopoly, and the monopoly gets jealous when things like this happen. And that's why there's been some talk about ESCOM delaying stuff or grid connections, or they being ESCOM being anti-renewable. But it should be understood that they're not playing significant role within the transition. So, as Cherryl mentioned, my case, the farms that I'm looking at are based in Lourensfontein, and they were awarded preferred bidder status in round 3, auction 3. Initially, the farm was planned as one, but it was broken up into 2 parts, and it was built in tandem. Each farm has an installed capacity of 140 megawatts, and each farm sits on about 3,440 or 50 hectares. And the farms are about 60 kilometers outside of Lourensfontein, the town. So they're quite far, close but far. And the construction started in 2015 and ended in December 2017. So it's about 2.5 years of construction. So with this, one of the things I wanted to find out is how do these companies understand development, and who's involved and who has the power to decide what's going to happen and why and how. So one of the municipal manager I interviewed explained the situation as such. As you can read for yourself, I'm sure you're going to read faster than I am. But what he's trying to highlight here is that the companies didn't know what to do with the municipality. They knew there was a local economic development plan and an integrated development plan, and they knew it was there, but they didn't know quite what to do with it. So they had these documents, but they didn't know what to do with them. Added to my case study is that there was the council, which is in Calvinia, was ANC driven, ANC administered, but the ward where the farms will be based was a DA ward. So it was quite clear to see the political tension about where development should go, who should get the money, who should control it. So that was quite clear. What was not clear in the beginning for me, because I could not find most of the documents that I'm looking for, is that where is this money being spent on? So there's where the money is being spent on. And for me, what it indicates is that money is being spent where the state has failed, to put it bluntly. And some would even argue that where the state has collapsed. And it is within this failure that I'm trying to understand socio-economic development in the Karoo, and how this education, healthcare, social welfare helps people improve their capabilities, because that's one of the theories I'm dealing with, the capability approach. So the company I'm working with, trying to interview, they've donated teachers, they're sponsoring teachers' salaries, they've donated books, they have donated kits, drama outfits. They've done quite a lot, it appears. But they've done quite a lot under one company that's there. It's called the Lourensfontein Work and Grow Primary Cooperative Limited company, so to say. And this is a company which at the moment is run by former worker of Mainstream, the former country manager, and it's a company that was only registered in 2018, a year after construction. This is important to highlight, because planning, when it comes to development, planning is important. You need to tell people what you want to do, why you're doing it, how are you going to do it, who's going to be involved. You don't just come from wherever you come and say, okay, now we're going to build a road and that's it. Or we're going to put up a fence and that's it. No discussions, nothing. So at the moment, the idea of development is a top-down approach by companies. I would say all of them, in fact. Very few are not doing it, but I would argue 90%. But in my community, well, in this particular community, this top-down approach has meant that the relationship with the company and the community is very strained. In fact, I've never encountered such a thing. There's a clear divide, and yeah, things are just being driven top-down. So I don't find out what exactly went wrong. And as you can read for yourself, the implementation manager of the company has a few things to say. She came in after a plan was hatched to help the community through the economic development manager, who's based in Newlands, and she used to stay in Lotusfontein. So there are a couple of things that are important. I gave you the political explanation why things could go wrong, and the management one. Now is another communication, I would imagine, a communication issue and a money issue. Are we done reading? She goes further to say, it's not that people are poor and don't understand. Even educated people, and I would imagine even yourselves, will know that educated people can be difficult and sometimes don't want to understand. So one of the things she highlighted is the way communication flows within the communities. In the community, who gets the information first, how it flows, where it comes from, who's saying it, why are they saying it, what are their interests. She has 3 years experience within the industry, and she was an implementation agent in a previous work. So this is what she found when she got to Lotusfontein after construction. And I managed to speak to the person who was thinking about development in Lotusfontein, the economic development manager. Sorry, she subsequently resigned after being there for a year. And from the horse's mouth, who also subsequently resigned after being there for a year, she's explaining that construction was viewed weirdly as a matter of operation. So there was no planning, and it was quite clear to me that there was no planning. She tried to plan, but she was obstructed, she claims. She was accused of not talking to the wrong side of the community, the brown community, and not the white community. And she highlights that the complexities actually came when white people were not identified as the beneficiaries of socio-economic development. And that's one of, she claims that that's where the tension really started coming up within the community. So she claims that, well, not she claims, she says that the way to circumnavigate the things was to go for the easy targets: healthcare, education, and social welfare. The implication is that you don't need California Council to approve most of the things that are being done in these 3 sectors. You can straight go to the school, tell them what they need, and ask them what they need. They tell you, and you sponsor it or you provide it. As I mentioned, she also resigned. But this is what the councillor said, who subsequently has now left Lotusfontein. She made it clear that she's not interested in economic development money. She's interested in socio-economic development. Sorry, enterprise development money. She's interested in socio-economic and service delivery. So she actually, in our first interviews, she did see that money, there will be problem in the future, and there is a problem now. There's a business forum apparently, but it's not benefiting the community, one part of the community. So I was trying to find out what has gone wrong, and this is just a couple of parts of my interview with the municipal manager. So he's offering practical solutions, but I hope you can see where this is heading. He's also showing that he doesn't quite understand why they're not involved even more with development. And one thing he suggests that it should be changed is procurement. But the view from the IPP office in Centurion, when I asked them about the role of municipality, that's what he told me, one of the guys that I interviewed.
Tumi, I think, can you just summarize it, because it might be hard for people at the back
to read.
No.
He's basically saying he's conceding to the fact that the IPP, Renewable Energy, is a top-down driven approach, and he's conceding that it doesn't work, it will not work. But he's also sympathetic to municipalities, that sometimes they don't know what to do, partly because they were not communicated, they were not told what to do. Their roles was not communicated to them. But I asked him if it's fair for communities to demand what they want to demand, and he says it's unfair. However, if renewable energy companies don't do what they have to do, the Northern Cape will just remain poor, it will suffer. And the renewable energy companies will go elsewhere, which is quite false, because you don't just decide to put a wind farm in Stellenbosch. There are certain things that need to be followed. Nor do you decide to put a solar, you just can't take renewable energy anyway. It needs to be in a particular place. So he thinks that things will turn out well. However, sorry, I just have to mention, this was in 2017, so a lot has happened since then. He was optimistic that things will turn out well. However, I'm of a different view. Since now that the unions have woken up to their demands and what they want with the transition. So my question is just rather to ask, can we transition in a space where it is a top-down approach? There's no social consensus, and we don't understand. We can't even agree what a job looks like, whether it's in megawatts installed, megawatts generated, whether it's in job years. So I'm trying to find out what a just transition looks like within our country, which is not the Netherlands or Germany. And next is Steph.
Okay. And then Stephen's going to take over to Cherry. Welcome, Steve.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to say thank you for my colleague Tumi, who actually did a bulk of the work by introducing what the REAP really is, so it makes my job a lot easier. So today I'm going to focus a lot more on my case study design, and it's focusing on the local household energy needs and the actually energy challenges as well in a town surrounded by renewable energy projects. I started this in 2017 as part of my master's degree with Professor Cherryl Walker in the South African Research Chair on Land, Environment and Sustainable Development, which is funded by the NRF. And this study really sets out to investigate the energy needs and challenges facing poor households in a small town called De Aar in the Northern Cape in relation to the significant national and international investment in renewable energy that is currently taking place around the town as part of the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Procurement Program. So what I really should be calling this is not power to the people, but is renewable energy power for the people. While renewable energy is widely regarded as critical for turning South Africa's reliance on coal away and reducing its national and global carbon footprint, it's not exactly clear to the extent that local communities are in fact benefiting from the current rollout of renewable energy. Now, whether this is in the form of cheaper household sources of energy locally or an improved access to jobs or other socio-economic opportunities. So this is a map of South Africa. Before 1994, the apartheid government actually really focused a lot on securing electricity, mostly in urban centres, very specific also about the type of urban centres. But after the 1994 elections, the ANC government prioritised less energy security. It was less about having enough electricity in certain areas and more about energy access, giving access especially to rural areas and also electricity affordability. So after 1994, the Integrated National Electrification Program was launched, and South Africa pre-1994 was about 36% of the areas in South Africa had electrification. Now about 90% of the country is actually connected to the national grid. Yet disparities in electricity affordability and access continue to persist across racial and class lines. Now, my research is in De Aar. As a research site, it lies in the Mtangeni municipality in the Northern Cape, along with Britstown and Hanover. And it's a particularly interesting site in relation to the mineral energy complex as conceptualized by Ben Fine and Sociology in terms of its establishment as a town due to the railway hub in 1884 during the Kimberley Diamond Rush. Now, of course, De Aar is again a hub, and this time of renewable energy, which it has become due to the REAP program. Yet it faces significant social challenges, social issues such as high unemployment rates, high prevalence rates of fetal alcohol syndrome. In fact, the prevalence rate is 12.2%, which means for every 1,000 people living in De Aar, 120 people are suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome. To put that into perspective, the United States has a 1% prevalence rate. And then, of course, drugs such as Malope and methamphetamine and TIC have made news, the local news in recent years due to the high prevalence rates in De Aar. This map, sort of the blue, shows the wind farms where the environmental impact assessments have been done. It's very difficult to map a wind farm. Still going to create that. And these are the solar farms. And what I want you to get a sense is that it's really close to town. As Tumi mentioned, these renewable energy projects, as part of their bid, they have to invest in the towns within a 50-kilometer radius. And the solar energy in De Aar is actually within a 12-kilometer radius of the town. So it's really close. And where the two wind farms are 60 kilometers outside of the town. In my town, they're super close and they're imposing, and you can actually see them wherever you are in town. There is about 30,000 people living in De Aar, and there's about 5,300 households. This will become important later. And currently there are 4 solar farms and 2 wind farms in De Aar. And I'm just going to quickly run through the different types of renewable energy in De Aar so that you can get a sense of the space and also the scale. So the first one is called Mulilo Solar. It's a very small, it's 10 megawatts. Wind farm is completed, the solar farm completed in October 2013. The next one is De Aar Solar Power, run by Globelec. This is a 45 megawatt wind farm completed and connected to the national grid in April 2014. And there is the town of De Aar. Now, a portion of this is also common-edge land, which the municipality is actually leasing to the renewable energy in order to gain an income as well. The next is really large. It's a 85 megawatt solar farm, which was completed in August 2014. And the co-founder of this company really wants to create what he calls a solar Lego land. So what he did was he connected a further 90 megawatts to the existing solar farm in order to create a massive 175 megawatts solar farm, which these 2 farms alone can power 50,000 households annually, which they call average household electricity needs, and that's about 10 times De Aar. So De Aar is also home to 2 wind farms. It's very difficult to get a picture of them, but I tried my best. They're both Chinese companies. In fact, it's actually one company. The one is 144 megawatts, again, incredibly large, and then the other one is about 100 megawatts. They were completed in November 2017. The reason why I'm giving you the dates is because from 2013 up until November 2017, there's been constant construction. So I think I wouldn't say the boom has happened, and I wouldn't say the bust, but it has plateaued, definitely. There's no more construction yet done, and there's no more bids actually going into that area, also because it's becoming quite dense with renewable energy. So ideally you wouldn't see a bust because these renewable energy companies are investing quite a lot in the town. Now, one of the co-founders and CEOs of the renewable energy company said that when we arrived, there were bushes blowing through the streets. It was really non-operational as an economic entity. This is now Dar. And now it's becoming a vibrant town. Ideally, if you're running a wind farm, you would continue to want bushes blowing through the streets because you do want wind to be there. Now, let's look at this vibrant town. Unfortunately, at the moment, there's a strained relationship with the Mtanjeni municipality and the renewable energy sector. As I think, as my colleague stated, they have to invest in socio-economic development and enterprise development. This is now the renewable energy companies. However, as this quote sort of illustrates, there was a public consultation process with the renewable energy companies, but they actually never attended. Some of them refused to attend, and some of them didn't even submit their inputs. And as well, that it's not, as my colleague has said, the renewable energy companies, what they're doing in terms of socio-economic development and enterprise development does not align with the local municipality's integrated development plan. So initially, there was quite a lot of positivity. People were positive about renewable energy coming in, especially the local municipality, who has an incredible maintenance backlog on their own personal grid. They lose about 24% of electricity being generated due to line losses. This is not illegal connections. This is line losses due to an outdated energy grid, which they would, of course, want to upgrade, but they do not have the funds. But this is actually also threatening the town's electricity supply. So they were really positive when renewable energy came. However, when they realized benefits weren't happening, it quickly became a pessimistic view. So where do I fit in all of this? I chose to do a mixed method approach in Karoo residential area, which is this residential area. Specific reasons why I picked this area as well. My mixed methods research included surveys, 50 surveys which captured about 313 people, and 15 follow-up interviews with people who I actually did a survey with. To give you a bit of demographics on this area, it's a coloured area, it's an Afrikaans area, it's RDP housing. The household size is quite large, much larger than the national average of 4.2. It's about 6. 68% of people captured in the survey receive free basic electricity. That means it's a government subsidy that they give to indigent households. If these households earn less than 5,300 rand per month, they receive 50 kilowatts every 30-day cycle. And just to flag, you don't get the 50 kilowatts for free. You have to at least buy electricity so that you can get an extra code on your prepaid electricity slip. And then 92% are actually on those prepaid electricities. Something else about this area, that's the only tarred road. So it is a really dusty, the same bushes blowing. It is that type of area. And yeah, let's get into, this is what a ground view of the area looks like. I'm actually standing here in the soccer field, supposedly 2 years after the renewable energy company upgraded it. And these are the houses. So you can see there are street lights, but again, not many of them actually work. But this isn't really an area that's being looked after, I should add. So employment is, it's not bad. It's 53.7%, and that's of people who can actually work. So I excluded people receiving a pension grant, and I excluded people who are receiving a physical disability grant, and people younger than 15 years old, even if they weren't in school. So that about 147 people can actually work. 38% of households rely on social grants to supplement. That's not only social grants, that's to supplement their income. And the average monthly income is about just below 6,000 rand. And then the average spent on electricity bills is 300 rand per month, which doesn't seem like a lot given the household sizes, but we're going to get into that real quickly. So from my survey data, I asked the question, what is the primary source of energy? Primary was, what is the first source that you actually really use? And I said for household energy needs. And these needs are the same sort of that you can find in the Statistics South Africa Census questionnaire. We're asking about heating of water, lighting, heating of space, and cooking. There's a lot of statistics in here, and we can unpack this the whole day. But what I want you to take away is that electricity is by far the predominant source. Everybody is using electricity, and everybody wants to use electricity. Just to flag that heating of water, 96% of the time is done by kettle. There's no solar water geysers in Karoo residential area, and there's also no, well, actually not no, 2 people had electrical geysers for warm water, and these were by far outliers. They earned more than 20,000 rand. The one was a retired lawyer living with his daughter, sometimes practicing. The other one was a teacher, an HOD in a high school. So those 2 were outliers. Then electricity was really important to the residents, as I got from the follow-up interviews. As Mia states, Mia's actually 83-year-old. She's one of the largest households. She has 15 people living in her house, and she just, you can't go without it. It's difficult for her age, it's difficult to go and find firewood, it's difficult to make alternative plans. So electricity is incredibly important to her. Then Rebecca was interviewed on the same day. She doesn't want to go back. She's a 53-year-old female, and she doesn't want to go back to the days when they actually made fire. Hopefully these quotes just illustrate how important electricity is for people in the area. And I feel that the Mari's quote really sort of illustrates, it's a very powerful quote, in that electricity is also attached to just it becoming a home, it becoming a house. It's not just a brick structure anymore. So while I showed you the primary sources of electricity, I would now like to go into the secondary sources of electricity. So if electricity is not available, what do they then use? And this paints a very different picture. Here I distinguish between wood that was bought and then wood collected. So wood collected, sort of a free, although labor intensive, but it is free, so to speak. Now, I found some statistically significant findings from this, and if you control for energy as a primary energy source, so that means if a person says that they use electricity for cooking, their secondary source would always be wood collected. Not wood bought, not paraffin, not gas. They would go and collect wood. For lighting, if they used electricity for inside the households to light, they would use candles. Again, not paraffin or not a gas, candles, relatively cheap, incredibly cheap, those 6-pack white candles. And again, for heating of water, if they used primary electricity, they would use wood collected. And this is a statistically significant finding. Then I thought, let me ask, do you collect firewood for household needs? Those same household needs, do they for heating, for lighting, for heating of space, and also for cooking? And I used the average electricity cost per month. Now, this is to be expected. If you're not spending anything on electricity and you don't have electricity, you are going to use and collect wood. If you're spending more than 1,000 rand, you might have more than enough money, so you're not going to go and look out for wood to collect, because you can actually buy wood, which was also a question. But I did not expect this finding, that people who spend more than 750 rand on electricity, between 750 and 1,000 rand, are actually 100% also go and look for firewood, and also to supplement their household energy needs. So just to recap, electricity is the primary energy source for many of the households in Karoo. It's incredibly important for them. They will continue to use it. They want to use it. It does make their lives a lot better. However, they do struggle to pay for electricity. They're incredibly reliant on free basic electricity, even if it just means that extra 50 kilowatts means that they can actually boil the kettle so that they can bath their children or they can wash dishes. And the strategies that they employ are quite simple. They borrow money. Even if it has to be from loan sharks, you will borrow money because you firstly want electricity. You don't necessarily want to go pick up firewood or that same amount of money to spend on paraffin or gas. And they're, as I said, they're incredibly important on what we call free electricity. although quite labour intensive. Also found that they don't stock up wood, it's on a daily basis. So they grab just enough for what their needs are, and then the next day they have to go and grab some more wood. So I don't think the renewable energy independent power producers procurement is aligned to locals' energy challenges. I understand that it's not the renewable energies program's mandate to actually provide electricity to these households, nor is it their responsibility to address energy poverty in the country. However, it's not really sufficient to install electricity meters and to say, okay, there's access, when in fact there's no use of that access. The reality is, for a large majority of households in the country, while my research was a case study, we do know it's within the country, they cannot afford electricity and they do rely quite heavily on traditional energy sources. I think it's absolutely great that these renewable energy companies are investing in computer centers or giving out free Wi-Fi, but the reality is, at the end of the day, the resident has to go home, has to go and find firewood after they've used the free Wi-Fi to supplement their basic household energy needs. So my problem is with the way that it's sort of conceptualized, that our country is sort of conceptualized. We're going back to a model where we're securing electricity. We're not focusing on affordability and energy access. So thank you so much. Oh yeah.
Stephen wants me to continue as the chair, so let's open it up for discussion, and we can follow the standard method, I guess, or the usual method of getting a few questions posed or comments. Feel free and say who it's for, but I think some of them might also be directed to Tumi and Steph together as well. We would like to begin. Right, anybody else?
Okay, Steph, Tumi, thanks. This is very interesting. I've become increasingly interested. This is not my main area, but I've become increasingly interested in this. I could ask you just to clarify your overall position. I mean, I'm getting quite a pessimistic kind of sense of you study independent power producers, both of you, but from both of you I'm getting kind of a pessimistic message. I think overall, maybe you just qualify that. To me, you seem to be saying, okay, they're not stable jobs, so where's the just transition? You seem to be saying, well, there's all this biomass that's still being used, so poor people are not really getting a benefit from electricity. Am I caricaturing you a little bit here? It seems to me this is a very complex issue. To the extent that electricity is used across the country. So in economics, whether electricity production produces jobs is not necessarily, doesn't say necessarily a lot about the kind of the need for electricity more generally. I mean, we're increasingly completely dependent and requiring more electricity, and economists, well, most of the environmental economists are telling us clearly that this renewable energy is now cheaper than all the fossils. So given that kind of macro argument that's being made here, am I reading your kind of pessimism correctly?
Okay, should we just take, you got that, and then let's ask Sivan, do you want to also?
Yes, thank you very much to both of you. I want to try to focus on the issue of how development can take place in villages and towns close to these renewable energy groupings. And I'd like to start off making 2 points. The first point is that certainly Ilse Ekelaar-Meers, who studied migration in the northern and the eastern and the western Cape, among particularly those who classified themselves as coloured, showed very clearly that the youth leave the kinds of towns you're looking at. I mean, neither of you have actually looked at the particular demographic, what's the word, pyramid. And I would guess in both cases, you will find that the young adults have left, which means that we're talking about dual-based households. We're talking about having a household in Cape Town or in Kimberley or in Bloemfontein. And that, I'm going to make the case when I'm finished that that is part of how development ought to be seen. Not just development for the town, but development for this dual-based system that I think should be developing for a long time. The second point, and I won't be very long, Cherryl, the second point is that I was in Mali in about a year ago, and what was extraordinary was the amount of Chinese manufactured small solar panels I found in the supermarkets and in the general markets of Mali. And I asked what they were used for, and they were used for poor people who put them up either outside or inside their houses, no batteries, and they started cooking during the day and warming water during the day rather than the night. There's lots of sun. What is extraordinary is that neither of you, I'm being critical, and neither of you have addressed the issue that both wind comes and goes, and sun comes and goes. So they can't simply start selling directly. They've got to go into the grid. If they go into the grid, the ESCOM prices go up and they can't afford it. But there is an issue to be made that you are precisely in the towns where you've got these large wind and sun farms, which means that there is a massive advantage that homesteads could have if they were to put up solar panels, if they were to have, I mean, whatever it is, which is starting to happen now. So, I mean, that's a question to both of you. So, I suppose the question is, first, do you think this dual rootedness, which is very much Eastern Cape, Western Cape here, you've got a family there, you've got a family here, and development means between the two. In other words, development is not just economic, social development in the town. It's got to do with the ties of kin, and I would guess particularly young kin, because certainly in the Northern Cape there were many more young people leaving than coming in when we last looked at it. And the second is, what about this idea of the towns and the people you're looking at are precisely in the same place where it is valuable and profit-making for your large renewable companies to situate themselves. So there should be the same kind of advantage in principle for the households in Karoo. It's Kareeville, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's my question, if it makes sense.
Are there any other questions that relate to the two that we've had now? Okay, well then let's ask who wants to go first.
I will go first then.
Okay.
And I'll answer one of Simon's question and address Lloyd. Yes, I'll answer your second question, Simon. I agree with you completely. There's a problem though. We have a national grid. We don't have embedded generation capabilities. So it is possible to do that. But unfortunately, the way our electricity system is organized means that electricity first has to go to the grid. In fact, after it's been generated in Louisfontein, it doesn't even go to Louisfontein, it comes to Cape Town first. So we have a national grid, and because of that, we don't have space for embedded energy generation like we have in Mali and in other small towns in Kenya. So that, but I agree completely. But just the way our system has been set up, it's not possible. Lloyd, yes, I am pessimistic. I am, not because of the transition, but because of the way the transition is being played out. I'm not pro or anti-renewable. If it's a least cost plan, we must take it. But it is not possible that in our country we could have a top-down approach in something as critical as energy. You can go to Mpumalanga and ask people of Mpumalanga whether they would like their coal mines to be shut. And if you continue with that top-down approach, there will be a tipping point. And we know when there's a tipping point, people burn stuff in South Africa. So the transition, I'm happy with it, but the way it's being managed and the models and methods that are being used, I'm very critical of it. And it's not just me. The Alternative Information and Development Centers did more or less a case study of the Northern Cape, Western Cape, and the Eastern Cape. And they're of the view that the power dynamics between how things are playing out, it's just not, they don't work out for local communities.
Yeah, I guess I could just immediately add on to Simon before coming to Lloyd's one, which is, yeah, I definitely agree. We should be looking at more decentralized electricity units, but it's not happening in our country. There's wonderful things done in Kenya. There's one where they electrify the entire town. They can go off grid and they're living wonderful lives. They've got electricity, but it's enough for them. Cooking during the day, as you said. The renewable energy in the R, it's actually generating so much that our national grid can't even take that much load. So the amount that's going wasted as well, nobody's really talking about that because we don't have storage yet. So we are losing quite a lot as well that could be generated. And I would have argued, I think starting out, that these companies have a golden opportunity. Leave the development, give these towns electricity. You're an electricity company, do electricity. That's not happening. I'll come back to your second question. Lloyd, I think the question to ask is, were we pessimistic when we went in, and are we now? Because I don't know, I can't speak for Tumi, but I don't think I was as pessimistic as I am now. I was quite hopeful in the same. I definitely never against renewable energy. It is a better form. It is, if it's cheaper, then we should definitely do it. And if it's doing development correctly, go forward with it. Not arguing that, but the way it is conceptualized almost as just another mining company, except the mine is the sun. Then to go back to Simon's question, so the survey that I did was based on a general household survey. However, a lot of my questions focused on perception and awareness of the renewable energy sector, and then also a lot of energy questions. Because it's also a general household survey, I looked at the pyramid. There's a lot of young people, actually percentage-wise, even in Karoo, much more than in the larger energy municipality from Stats SA, which I will write about, of course, in my thesis. But the amount of young people there who are doing odd jobs, who are not moving to Cape Town, who are not moving to other sort of city hubs, is quite shocking. So I know ILSA works in different areas, such as Eastern and Western Cape, where I'm working at, and specifically in that residential area, there's a lot of young people who don't have they're not dual-based households. And I think that adds to why the households are so big. You have 34 generations living in a household. So if that answers your question.
And just to add to that, and maybe you could both comment on this, but it seems like people are also moving to some of the hubs, right? And I mean, there are also of a certain size that that if you're being, well, people are moving there after some jobs, and also I think for people who are being moved off, evicted off farms, there's also some sort of gravitation. So those dynamics are, they place specific as well to some extent. And there are, being as big as it is a kind of a local. And then the possibility, and particularly when the jobs were being offered in the construction phase, it was attracting people who have not yet moved on and his family networks.
May I just add one thing? I know I had my turn.
No, you haven't.
I'm trying to have solar panels put across my whole roof, and I'm trying to get an inverter and then batteries. And I've been told that I'm able, it's going to cost something to, when I generate more electricity than we need inside the house, I can sell back to the municipality. And this is beginning to be accepted by certain municipalities. You sell it back at a profit to the municipality. Is there anything like that at all in either Karoo or in Dar? I mean, do the municipalities allow people, which could be the company, to actually make electricity available and when it's overproduced, they buy it back at a profit.
Yes and no. The role of municipalities when it comes to electricity is to distribute electricity. They don't sell electricity. ESCOM is the only seller of electricity, by the way. So their job is to distribute electricity. The Cape Town municipality took the Minister of Energy to court to allow it to sell, to buy electricity for its consumers who are overproducing electricity. But I think I must find out where the cases are. But there's a gray area there. But the role of a municipality in terms of electricity is distribution. In fact, as I mentioned, the electricity from Louisville gets transmitted to Cape Town first and gets distributed to households. So that's where the role of municipalities come in. By the way, distribution when it comes to municipality forms about 40 to 50% of their income profit. So it's very important for municipality to distribute electricity and keep on distributing in order for them to remain functional, if there's such a thing.
Stephanie and Tumi, thanks, that was great. I've actually got two separate questions for both of you. So, Steph, you implied that there's something important about the proximity of the wind farms and solar generation close to the R. And in response to one of the previous comments, you said that certainly the possibility for direct supply of energy from these renewable energy installations could be one of the benefits of having it so close to in proximity to the R specifically. But I'm wondering whether there are other implications of these being so closely located to the town, possibly in relation to what you suggest, the almost symbolic value of having electricity in these households and so on. So the question is really, what is the discourse in these houses? What is the conversation that people are having around these installations so close to them, I assume obviously visible and so on. So that's the question. And then for you, Tumi, I've got a bit of a wanting you to move beyond what you've presented and so on. So your notion of this just transition seemed to hinge around the decency of work created around renewable energy to some extent. And in your presentation, you spoke about the number of jobs being created and so on, but that they short-term and very much characteristic of jobs being created currently. But your suggestion is that these social and development around these forms of energy is sort of an imposition from above and completely sidesteps what happens in these communities and the needs of these communities and so on. So my question is around decent work, right? Which in itself is and one could see as an imposition, not just from elsewhere, but also from a different age, where we, almost a nostalgic reflection on what work used to be. So my question is, how does the notion of decent work land in recent days? What are people's ideas and conversations and responses to the decency of work created around this?
Okay. Well, related to that question, I was thinking about if you could maybe tell us something about former land uses, so wind and solar farms where they used to be before, and Steph also in relation to the commonage around the arm that you mentioned is being leased right to one of the companies. And then it's just a short comment, if I may. I was thinking when you said it's becoming too dense, there are, and you mentioned one of the companies, Mulilo, is also operating now in Priska. So I was thinking whether maybe the frontier is moving northwards. So the R is full, etc., and then we have these construction phases actually, it's full swing in the north.
Yes, no, I'm managing it in my head.
Okay.
Yes, no, thanks for the question. I agree. The idea of decent work, it's a framework, and it's a framework that's based on the idea of full-time employment. Just after the Second World War, and the idea that there needs to be employment first, and it must be full-time with benefits and security. But how it lands in Lotusfontein is in relation to farming. So when I ask the people, okay, what does decent work look like? What do you want to do? I said, no, I want to work. Okay, what do you want to do? What work do you want to do? Some took time to tell me what they want. Very few told me I want to become a doctor or I want to become a mechanic. But it appears that the way it lands is in relation to farming, and it makes sense why it's in relation to farming. Because either you're going to grow up in Lotusfontein, move, try your luck elsewhere, Cape Town, or go into farming. But because farming, it's a sunset industry, I would say, sort of. Construction of wind farms was just a decent job, to put it bluntly. But there was also the realization that it's not going to be there for long. It's going to be there for 2 years. But what I'm not getting out of my interview is that how do you then cope with the anxiety of, okay, you're going to be earning 6,000-7,000 a month, but that's for 2 years. Then what? So conceptually, with decent work, that's what I'm trying to bridge. And it's now getting to the terrain of precariousness. But is it a resilient precariousness, or is it just something else? I don't know.
Can I just add on to that? Because I think it's also the question that the discourse around decent work is also very much at the other end. So it's around coal mining, which I don't think agriculture, there's your sunset industry, although maybe in Lotusfontein, which is really affected by the drought. But there's a lot of coal. South Africa has a lot of coal resources still to use, so we can continue burning it for a long time. But there are consequences, etc., and we committed internationally to recover it. So, but that discourse is very much around coal mining driving some of the resistance to renewable energy. So again, it's how the dynamics are playing out in these different places, and the role of the unions become, who, in terms of what you're saying, are probably nostalgic in the way in which they are thinking about work.
But also that notions of decency around work doesn't include environmental conditions and environmental impact and those kinds of consciousness.
Yes, and I guess on then sort of environmental, what were the land uses you asked right began? So for solar farms, you wouldn't be farming around a solar farm. Most because some of the farmers who I spoke to, they're scared to farm around it because if there's any damage to the cables, it's their fault. They also don't put the cables quite low or underneath the ground. They're actually quite close to the ground. That's why some areas you can't walk in. It's like a construction site, and that's so that if there's problems with the cable. So if you're sheep farming and doing solar farming, odds are you're going to get some grilled lamb chop somewhere because of the solar farming. So they mostly were sheep farming. There were sheep farms, and then quite a few game farms. Those who had the money, of which one had, and he created an entire company. And the company is now one of the largest in South Africa, and it's investing so much into solar. And it all started with him investing into solar, making a company, finding the supply chain for renewable energy and then converting his own game farm, of which he's now also getting a kickback because he's leasing the land to a company which is his own. It's a very complicated story, but mostly they were farms. And I was also home to one of the largest abattoirs in the country, which is distributing Karoo lamb and lamb to larger areas of South Africa. So it's a very important abattoir to do about 1,000 carcasses a day, which is significant if you ask Ronald. Then, yes, to answer your question, what are the conversations around renewable energy? They're so interesting, actually, when you start to unpack them, and it's by far negative, 100%. And I think that has to do with the proximity, which is why that's the only thing I can think about, because it's staring them in the face every day, which is also why I chose Karoo. It's very close to that large solar farm that I showed that you can see, and that was commonage land that was basically in their backyard, which is now a solar farm. A lot of it is actually to do with health risks. So they think the solar farms are causing babies to be born disabled. They think it's causing a hotter climate, and it's changing the seasons in the Aard, which is significant actually, because we're investing in renewable energy to curb global climate change. And now here you have an entire community, almost in its entirety, thinking that renewable energy is causing. They're not calling it global climate change because they don't know what that term is, but they do think it changes temperatures and their environment. Also, I had a lot of people who said they had plants, and their plants died when the renewable energy came in due to radiation. I have looked at the statistics. I think there's 1 or 2 studies done about the actual radiation on a person, and it's not significant at all. So these things aren't causing that amount of radiation or changing the Aard climate significantly. Then in terms of job creations, they spoke quite a lot. I was surprised to find so many people who actually had been employed by the renewable energy company, while 86% of them said it created employment opportunities during the survey. Of that same 86%, 77% said, but it didn't benefit us. So even if they were employed, even if I wrote there, they were employed by this company, if it was for 5 months, if it was for 3 months, because also the Aard renewable energy was actually constructed in a lot less time than 2 years. In fact, the longest was about 1 year and 6 months, which everybody's applauding and going, this is incredible. You could raise from the ground basically up, but that has a knock-on effect in terms of employment opportunities just for a few months, which is incredibly big boom and bust for these people. So it was very negative. I would say negative was by far and large. Yeah. Does that answer the question a little bit? I spoke about land use.
The frontier.
Oh, the frontier. I don't think Prisca's going to be the place to go. Prisca is very interesting. There are a couple of new land uses in Prisca. What's interesting about this specific company as well, if we have time, is that they don't use, how would you say, the most optimal of equipment. Can I say that? For example, the wind farms, they're usually about 2.5 or 3 megawatts per turbine. This company is 1.5 megawatts per turbine, which means they have to plant double the amount, which is why their wind farms are 10, 15,000 hectares, sometimes 20 even, because they need that much amount of space in order to plant 150 turbines in order to get the same output in terms of megawatts for what Tumi's farm would be.
I was also just wanting to sort of come back to Lloyd's point perhaps a little bit, but thinking through some of how one thinks about the local issues in relation to the national, and that of course is one of the questions we are grappling with in the program, but it seems understanding the local and perceptions and realities and needs and issues and then the dysfunctional municipalities, but also an inherited national grid, which you're sort of using to be referred. You referred, I think. You're both working with the idea of the minerals energy company. I mean, just this legacy. how they are working out. We really do need to understand it as well. And one of the things that's happening, for instance, around, I mentioned that the Karoo is 36% of commercial farmland is in the Karoo, and it's all, not all, but just about all, is white owned. So in terms of land reform, but also agrarian reform in the context of climate change and global warming, these things are all happening, as we know, and in silos. So the people, the farmers, the commonage is one thing. So commonage that has been used elsewhere for, and in Jerusalem, and Cherryl's working on that. Actually, the commonage there is largely, there are small farmers and lots of problems. So that opportunity in Da'ar, I think, has been preempted. The people who are benefiting from the solar and the wind farms are the established commercial farmers who are leasing their land, and it's much easier return. The income is a much easier return because it's guaranteed, and you're not having to farm in with all its attendant problems. So there's so many things to actually think about, and in terms of a kind of, not an integrated development in terms of sort of government bureaucracy, but actually trying to think holistically about sustainability and locality. It's just not happening, and that's the, and then it's the way this disjuncture between, and it's partly because the Karoo is seen as, in the national discourse, as it's just there, it's wasteland. Let's frack it, let's renew it, let's do whatever, because it's feeding into the national economy. But yeah, so it's also thinking about those issues. And they are really very complicated, but around, if you think about sustainability, there are so many gaps. Because we argue about, I'm defending renewable energy as a source of power, of household and economic more generally, but the way in which it's been organized, largely, well, it's the public-private partnerships, right? But it's very much, many of the companies, they could be doing shale gas mining, could be fracking or renewables. I mean, they're different, they equal business, commercial opportunities as well. So that's, but obviously renewables is cleaner. That's a bit of a rant.
May I make a last comment? You will be just for. I recently read a book called How Change Happens, which is a history of Oxfam in Africa, and the author argues that the most important catalysts for change in Africa are not the governments, the catalysts are not the movements, they are the transnational corporations. And one needs to study up into those transnational corporations, capitalist as they are, to understand the way in which they think of their profits and they think of development. And I would suggest that these companies that you've been speaking about, to get into them and to try and find out how they understand corporate social responsibility, how they understand ESCOM, how they understand the national government and the local government, to get an idea from inside them of how they see what they call development. And the impression I have, I may be wrong, is that at the moment they say, here's some money, go and do what you like with it. I don't know, that's the impression I have. All I'm saying is that I think there's a need to try and get into those companies and see how they see corporate social responsibility, if they still use that term.
You want to comment on your
Yes.
experiences with that?
They're capitalist, and capitalist is worried about profit. I try to at least get into my company's head, how it thinks. The way they think about development or social corporate responsibilities in a profit-driven way. For example, we are not allowed to have access to their social development plan when they bid. We can't access it. So researchers, community members, you can't access it. You can't, because it has a.
You don't know what they want to do.
Yes, you don't. They don't want us to know what they want to do in communities that are based, because for them, that development plan is money. That it's money. So their way of thinking about development is profit driven also. So the logic still stands. They're not just giving out money, they're just giving out money, healthcare, education, social welfare, because it's the easy takings. I don't have to discuss with municipalities if I'm going to donate 10 computers. I go straight to the school and I say, okay, what do you need? I need a computer and a fiber. Okay, here's the money. Or I'll bring my engineers to bring it. So I don't need to, I cut the middleman altogether. And they are doing that at all, wherever you see a renewable energy plant, you must know you can't access the social level. You don't know what's happening.
If I can add on to that, it's really interesting as well because they have to do all this economic development plan and enterprise development plan, but they don't want people to know what they're doing, which is a bit counterintuitive. You would want people to know what they're doing so that they could know what they can access. I'm not speaking now as a researcher, I'm speaking as actually as a community member. Because local municipality also sometimes doesn't know what they're doing. We have no idea what we're doing. We saw a new computer, or we saw Wi-Fi being put in. Like, we don't even know, can we use it? The interesting thing of Tumi's place, it's one company, right? Running both, in my research site in the R, it's 3 different companies. And then you really start to see how they, that's a sacred document. We don't know what the other company is going to do in terms of development, but ours has to look better. So if we give out to the poorest, or we paint people's shacks or whatever, or we focus on the black community, which is what started to happen. They didn't focus on the colored community in the R, they focused on the black community, because it could score them more points, and it could score them better in terms of what they did. And to be argued, there's a lot more to be done in that community as well. But now they're playing off the different residential areas in terms of who benefits and who gets what. So yeah, and then they become really secretive of what they do. We do early childhood development. That other company, they can't do it. We already started doing it. And you go and speak to the next company, you say, what are you doing? And we're like, well, we actually chose early development first. Okay? So they better focus on high school learners. Just to provide some insight.
I mean, just a reaction, and that is that I think that's very interesting. In a sense, it throws up the question of why are they secretive? Is it because they're scared of researchers, or is it because they're scared of the way in which the government or are going to assess the way in which they are according to the rules? Because insofar as one can understand that, one can then understand why they're secretive. I'm just saying that. I'm saying that in terms of this generalization, they are the catalysts that, to a large extent, not the change agents, the catalysts for the kinds of changes, the kinds of transitions that are going to take place. More so than this is the argument being made, more so than the municipality, and more so given civil society's movement than the civil society, both of whom are also important. That's what I'm saying. So to try and crack that secrecy wall, I would say is important. I don't know how you do it.
No,
I'm not saying you must break into their safe.
No, we
tried.
We tried. I was lucky enough to have access to the document that I'm looking for.
I think I was less, but I was able to access what I could access, which was given to me at the time. And I think a large portion of this, I don't think they're really scared of government, but I think they're very scared of what, they don't want their plans being stolen in terms of actual technology as well. Because that came up for me in a couple of interviews with the companies, that the type of solar panel we use in the technology is significantly better and it can yield better outputs than the next company. And I think that's where corporate secrecy actually came into play quite a large extent, because these places are fenced. You wonder what they're hiding, and the locals wonder that as well. It's like a prison. What are they're keeping the locals out. Yeah.
Stephen, you wanted to say something? And then maybe you could also just, I don't know if you wanted to say something in terms of the seminar series as well. The conclusion could be just about wrapping up.
Right. No, then I'll
No,
keep it
there's
short.
time. There's time for you to make a comment. We've still got a few
Yeah.
minutes.
Okay. No, it's a very small comment. Just what are they meant to be disclosing? I mean, there is legislation around freedom of access to information. I have people ask for this information, NGOs and so forth. Is there no oversight over the planning process? Okay, it may sound like a kind of silly question. But I think the question of scale is absolutely key, and Cherryl was talking about it. You know, when one looks at it in that immediate space of the infrastructure of the place, these contradictions are really big, and there are so many problems. But when you zoom out and then you make the argument that renewables is crucial, it's getting cheaper, we have to break the monopoly of the fossil fuel industry, and you get this activist language that is very different, and it's very difficult to get the two to talk to each other. The kind of the view from afar and the immediacy of people's reflections on a reality that's bigger than renewable energy. I mean, their marginalization, their inability to get jobs, etc., is part of a much longer historical story. So I'm not sure where to go with this, except to say it is a very important issue, because I was at a conference yesterday that's on climate justice, and in fact Jackie Cox spoke about research which is written about in Mpumalanga, precisely this point that people are very desperate for coal jobs and informal sector work around the coal mines. It supports a large numbers, particularly of women. You know, so she just alluded to what you've said and has done some research on that too. Just the view from the coal face, to use a metaphor.
It's the sunbelt.
Yeah, but I mean, it's something, sorry, this is my final. There's something that these activists that I was engaging with are trying to think through. How do you deal with something as big as climate justice and that reality that you're encountering around the actual space of implementation of the legal programs?
Seeing Rob wanted to just say something.
Yeah, just quickly, you mentioned so briefly that there's quite a high proportion of young people living in the area, and I'd like you to follow up on that a little bit, particularly around the people you surveyed and interviewed, and their attitudes towards, very negative attitudes towards renewable sources of energy in the wind farms and the solar panels, etc. And was there a difference at all? Did you notice a difference between the way the problems or views of young people, towards these compared to older people and their concerns? I mean, one of the things that struck me was the picture of the football pitch, and how it didn't look like a football pitch at all. I mean, it was grown over and everything, and the contrast between that and the solar panels and the wind farms. And I wondered, that presumably young people use the football pitch, etc. Do they, does that affect the way they think about?
That offers to, could you be quick?
Oh, it's just me. Rob. Yes, so it was actually the young people who were more, other people couldn't be bothered about it. It was like, there's this change happening in the art, but we know about this change because there used to be big change with the railway. So they've kind of seen it, whereas young people were like, this is actually quite significant. It's high-level technology in terms of the wind farms and the renewable energy, and yet we remain undeveloped. If that's briefly, that's where the negativity came in. There's no development. It's not a job. They thought it's not a job. I was there for 4 months. I still don't know what it is, and it's not a job, and now I can never go in there, they close the gates, and I'm out, kicked out. So if that briefly just summarise, we can chat a lot about the different things, but the young people, yeah, they saw it as it's not development, whereas older people were more of like, Yeah, it's there. It's probably affecting my health and doing really bad things for the climate. You know.
In closing and thanking them, I just want to insert, in addition to, in response to all the issues laid out in the question on climate justice and local and national, there is climate change. Global warming is happening as well, you know, so it's, and that, you know, that's also, and we know we are a major contributor to that, so that's also part of how do we bring that in as well. But thank you very much to both of you for presenting some of your work, not all of it, and I think we've also got a lot of questions next week we will be able to